Bill Gates, founder and manager of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, has arrived in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia for the two-day visit. Bill Gates is here in Ethiopia for the first time to discuss with government officials and stakeholders on the foundation's activities in the health and agriculture sectors in the country. Mr. Gates was welcomed at the Bole International Airport by Ethiopian Health Minister Dr. Tedros Adhanom on Monday evening. The foundation, since 2000, has spent nearly $400 million on health and agriculture activities. Ethiopian Premier Meles Zenawi says Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's involvement in the agriculture and health sectors would help achieve the country's development endeavors. The Premier made a remark while conferring with Bill Gates at his office on Tuesday. Meles said the foundation's commitment in agriculture and health sectors would have a big role to enhance Ethiopia's move towards change. Bill Gates also said what Ethiopia has been doing in the health sector could be exemplary for the rest of African countries, adding his foundation would extensively support Ethiopia's agriculture and health sectors.
I wonder if you can kind of talk about where you see the healthcare system of Ethiopia in 5 or 10 years.
Well, the last 10 years, they've gotten their childhood death rate down from over 15% down to about 8%. And they should be able to get it down below 2%. The U.S. is below 1%. Also, the malnourishment, which you see through stunting, still pretty high here. And by finding the children that aren't growing, getting nutritious foods out, improving agricultural productivity, they ought to be able to virtually eliminate malnutrition. Countries like Mexico and Brazil have put a lot of effort into that and are now at a level where that's not a huge problem for them. So they see those models of development, actually some fairly recent ones, including China, that have gone very, very well. And that means Ethiopia will, and this is their stated goal, be a middle-income country by 2025. So you'll think of it not as the United States, but like Indonesia, Mexico, Brazil, Thailand, like those countries are today. They absolutely can get there, and you know, the progress is very exciting. Health is such an enabling piece, and the country's really pulling together. The system is well designed. So it's a very positive story, one that I don't think most people know about.
Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. This session marks the start of the Addis chapter of our story in Africa.
This is something very special, providing a platform for concrete action.
The brilliance of this summit is the group of people that's been brought together here. In fact, there's 700 people who really are the change leaders from all over the world, all with the same intention, which is how do we improve the state of Africa? How do we tap into the brilliance of the population here in a way that helps not only Africa, but the world solve its key problems?
It's so awesome having like-minded people who are doing different things in their own way to shape the world.
This is the moment for us to reach and grab that opportunity, and everybody wants to be part of this transformation that's taking place.
It's about time we put the African in the center.
This really critical issue of African business leaders creating a true dialogue with government and the rest of society is how do we actually collectively improve competitiveness and move things forward?
People have been talking about public-private partnerships forever, and I feel like finally the dialogue is becoming more concrete and real.
Africa needs leadership that has very clear plans and strategies focused primarily on inclusive economic growth.
When you bring leaders together to discuss common issues, is another way of doing peer review. You begin to listen to your colleagues, and right there, you will notice things you need to do differently.
the whole government, the whole private sector, the whole policymakers, all of them were in agreement that there's need for us to work together.
We must adapt. We must change.
I've interviewed some of you in the audience. I speak a lot every week on Marketplace Africa to people about these very issues. And again and again and again, I hear both governments sometimes, but mostly private sector saying the one thing that is holding back Africa's growth is government regulations. When do you think a country like Ethiopia, for example, would liberalize the banking sector, the mobile sector?
Before I go to your question, I want to respond to some of the points that have been raised. Now, the World Bank says that there is over $90 billion. There's a gap of over $90 billion in investment in infrastructure. There has been very little infrastructure investment in most of Africa for the past 30 years. There was infrastructure investment in the initial period of colonization. And it's very interesting that you are refurbishing the railway system that was built by the Brits before the Prime Minister was born. And then in the initial years of independence. Since 1980s, the gap in infrastructure investment has gone in the wrong direction. Why? Because since the 1980s, the policy has been the private sector does the infrastructure. Now, why do we need infrastructure? What's the point? We need infrastructure primarily because that's an essential input for manufacturing, for exploiting our natural resources, for agriculture, and so on and so forth. Now, in manufacturing, public sector doesn't have much of a say. In agriculture, the public sector does not have much of a say. In mining, same thing. So enabling the private sector through public investment in infrastructure is not something that Africa is going to discover. If it tries to, it will simply be reinventing the wheel. That's what happened everywhere else. Second point I want to make. When I say much of infrastructure investment in Africa, not all, but much, will have to be public, that doesn't exclude, for example, in the case of a railway, implementation of the project will probably be done by some multinational company. The wagons and locomotives will naturally be manufactured by somebody else, another private sector. The management of the railway system itself might be done by a private company. But the ownership and the risk capital of that railway system, if it comes from the private sector, it will have a number of risks. First, all of you are saying the public sector has to de-risk. In other words, you are saying the public sector shoulders the risks and the private sector reaps the benefits. That's not going to work. Second, your discount rate is understandably high. You want to have a profit rate of what? 20%? The average profit rate in Africa that people expect is about 30%. With a discount rate of 30%. Imagine how much infrastructure we will be able to do and how much of the gap we are going to fill. So the idea should not be that the public sector should be out, private sector should be in. We have to do, each one of us have to do what our comparative advantage seems to suggest. Now, the public sector does not have money. And that is limiting investment in infrastructure. But you know, these whiz kids in the financial system, I'm sure they can create instruments. The Prime Minister created one instrument. It's called the IFF. The idea was that he would commit to pay a certain amount of money for, say, 30 years for development aid. And the banks would use that as collateral and give us the money now. Simple idea. Financial engineering. Same type of financial engineering can be made. GM has a big multinational financial institution. This talk about deleveraging and all the rest, there's trillions of dollars of money that does not know what to do. And because it does not know what to do, it's going from one commodity to another commodity and becoming a wrecking ball. Today it's oil, tomorrow it's wheat, the day after tomorrow it's some other paper. We want this capital here to do something tangible. And there's a risk here. And the risk, Don's institution is AAA rated. Mine is junk. So if Don could raise the money and lend it to me, then I'll have the money to invest. And the private sector can come in implementation, can come in manufacturing, and so on and so forth. Now, two issues you raised, telecommunications and finance. We have not liberalized the financial sector in the sense that we have not allowed foreign banks to operate in Ethiopia. Why? Because these giants, Chiam, manage an economy that's many times bigger than mine. These giants can wreck a giant economy such as that of the United Kingdom. Ours is a flimsy boat. They come in, they use instruments that we cannot control, that in most instances we don't even understand. The best of us don't even understand. How are we going to regulate it? How are we going to regulate these people? It's not possible. We don't have the capacity now. So what did we do? We allow the private sector in Ethiopia, which is not that, not infinitely more complex than the public sector, and therefore could easily be monitored and regulated by the public sector. We allow the private banks to operate here, so we have more than 10 private banks here, but not foreign banks. Is this going to be the permanent feature? No. As we grow, as we develop, and as we become more sophisticated in our regulatory capacity, of course we'll liberalize, but not now. And we have lost nothing because of this policy. Telecommunications. Ethiopia, as a country, I think in per capita terms, is investing more in infrastructure than perhaps any other country in Africa, whether it's railways or power or telecommunication. We're doing it by borrowing from banks that are not that good at speculation, mostly Chinese banks. So we have the money, borrowing it, and we want telecommunication in every school, in every village, and we want it cheap, not at 30% discount rate, at 2%, 3% discount rate. That is why we have not yet opened up the telecommunication sector to private investment. Is that going to be the permanent future? No. Once the market failure there is overcome, we move out. There were times when we owned breweries in this country. Now we are privatizing all of our breweries because that's not our business. The private sector can do it excellent and can do an excellent job. We used to own, and we still own some textiles. The only textile factories we own are the ones that we could not privatize because they're not making profit. But we want to privatize this. So it's not, our policy is not designed to keep the private sector at bay. We know that's a dead end. Without the private sector, there is no development. What our policy is based on is make sure that the public sector plays its role so that we will have Asia-type growth. What do I mean by Asia-type growth? Fast, but not just fast, equitable. Both fast and equitable growth. You cannot have fast and equitable growth without a clear division of labor and partnership between the private sector and the public sector.
ክቡር ጄፍሬ ፌልትማን ላስተላለፉት መልእክት በጣም አመሰግናለሁ።
Addis Abeba, la capital etíope, se ha teñido de luto por Meles Zenawi. Numerosos jefes de Estado africanos, delegaciones de medio mundo y personalidades como Bill Gates acuden hoy a este funeral de Estado por el hombre que dirigió Etiopía durante los últimos 21 años. La seguridad se ha extremado ante la gran presencia internacional.
The state funeral, Ethiopia's first for a leader in more than 80 years. The procession began in Mescal Square after a journey that took about 1 hour and a half from his official residence at the Grand National Palace. Zenawi's flag-draped coffin was taken through the streets of Addis Ababa to his final resting place at the Holy Trinity Cathedral. Thousands of mourners, including the young and the old, most of whom were dressed in black, openly mourned the death of their leader, as did the late Prime Minister's family members, led by his widow Azeb Mesfin, following closely behind the horse-drawn carriage adorned with white flowers and pictures of the 57-year-old leader, as it snaked through a procession through the city. Among those in attendance were Ethiopia's Deputy Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn, who is expected to take over government until the next national elections are held in 2015. Also in attendance were dozens of foreign dignitaries from China, the European Union and the United States. President Mwai Kibaki led the Kenyan delegation to the state funeral. Born on the 8th of May 1955, Zenawi became president in 1991 after helping to oust the former communist military rule of Mengistu Haile Mariam. Leaders who attended the service, including President Yayi Boni of Benin, who currently holds the presidency of the African Union, praised Zenawi for his strong vision and fight for the achievement of a free and prosperous Africa. Zenawi died on the 20th of August this year of an undisclosed illness in a Belgian hospital.